Morning, everyone. Welcome to the AU Patient Summary FHIR IG call. This is our first call after the Connectathon that happened this week in Brisbane. And the HL7 AU Connectathon, I think, was a pretty fantastic event. And we got so much connecting happening around patient summary. We've got some of the report back to happen and a little bit of a pictorial that we're trying to build out on all those different connections that I'll show you in this call. My name is Danielle Tavares-Rickson. I'm an AU Core TDG co-chair. The AU Core TDG, or Technical Design Group, looks after two projects. One is AU Core and one is AU Patient Summary. So I'll be chairing this meeting today, and we also have our scribe, which is Shelley, on the line. So I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country, and that we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather today, and we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. Today's agenda, which was sent round in our usual kind of fortnightly email where we say, here are the minutes of the last meeting and here's what's coming up, went through that there'll be, as we always do in every meeting, there's usual business. I think maybe someone has to go on mute. I think I'm hearing something.
Yeah, I'll put on mute.
We'll do a ballot update. So the patient summary ballot for comment is ongoing now. And so this will be a standing item until we have completed the ballot for comment activities. We'll do a Connectathon report back. I think that's either you, Tim, or maybe it's Landon who's doing that.
Yeah.
Then we've got, okay, awesome. We've got a ballot reconciliation. So there was notification there would be 3 items that have been raised in the ballot for comment so far that have been prepared for voting in this call. An advance notice was provided to the group to go have a look at those, and you can provide comment on them and so forth. And then if we have any time remaining, we'll continue through the AU Patient Summary Composition walkthrough. That was really well attended, and we had a great deal of discussion. But we really only got to the first element in what is a really long profile. So we're just going to keep doing and continuing that walkthrough until we have come to the end of that profile. I will also go through our next meetings. There's a couple of questions I need to put to this group about the scope of our next meetings. And that's the agenda for today. I'll open that up to others. Are there any other items that we need to be discussing today or that you would like to go on the agenda? All right, hearing none, we might move on to that first item then of usual business. So we actually have 2 sets of minutes to approve. So they're from the last 2 calls. We'll do those individually as votes. So I'll just go through and open each of those minutes. Let me click on the first one. So this is from our 8th of August call. These have been sent around for quite a while now. We have the list of attendees. We have the slides and the recording. We have the minutes showing the decisions that were made. There's also a transcript and a chat log, as there is on all of our minutes. And it was a pretty short meeting, I think, actually. So that is really all that was in there. It was a bit of the more like the ballot update, ballot 101. Does anyone need more time to review these minutes before we look to approve them? I'm not hearing any. So who would like to motion approval of the minutes of the 8th of August?
Yeah, move to approve.
Thanks, Stephen. Who would like to second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Tim. Any other questions or comments while I move to our electronic poll? All right, I'm just launching that now. I think. Yes. Okay, good. That's up. You should see in front of you options for affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you don't have access to that, please pop in the chat a +1 for affirmative, negative, or abstain. And if you've dialed in, you can just say your name and whether that's affirmative, negative, and abstain, or abstain. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll. I'll share the results. So what we have, including what's in the chat, we have 10 affirmative, 0 negative, 10 abstain. The motion carries. Those minutes are passed. So let me just go to the next set. So this is the 22nd, the minutes of the 22nd of August, the one after that call. So from this one was in particular around whether or not we should publish an updated snapshot of the FHIR IG for the purposes of Connectathon testing. So that was really, I think, the main thing we were actually discussing was the Connectathon in this call. We do actually have there's the co-chair attendees, the other attendees. We've got our slides. There's the recording, transcript, chat log. Then we have the minutes of what was discussed, including our decision to publish an updated draft to take to the Connectathon, which we then went and did. And also a discussion around particular Connectathon testing scenarios and whether or not there were any things that we wanted to test out in particular at the Connectathon. So that's what's in those minutes. Again, does anyone else need, does anyone need any more time to review these before we look to approve them? All right, hearing none, would anyone like to motion to approve the minutes of that last meeting?
I can motion, Danielle.
Thanks, Tim. Who would like to second?
I'll second Steve Swinsburg.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions or comments while I bring back that poll? All right, you should now see in front of you the electronic poll. This is now for the last meeting, which was on the 22nd of August. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. And again, pop it in the chat if you don't have access to the e-vote. And if you don't have access to either, because you've dialed in, you can just say your name and affirmative, negative, or abstain. Still need more people to vote. There's only about 65% who have voted so far. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll end that poll, share the results. And taking into account the vote in the chat, that's now 12 affirmative, 0 negative, 8 abstain. Motion carries. Those minutes passed. Thank you, everybody. All right, back to our usual business. I've lost my mouse. There it is. Aha. Okay, so updates and news. Now, the next HL7 AU Connectathon, that one is in December. We have confirmed dates now from HL7 AU. So it's going to be the 9th to 10th of December in Melbourne. There aren't tickets available yet, but they're going to come out really soon. I think it's very likely that might be next week. And if not next week, it'll be the week after that they'll be released on Eventbrite. If you want to get in early, you can always, I think there's a subscription, like a follow. So on Eventbrite, you can actually follow HL7 AU. And that means that when they release new events with tickets, you should be notified via email so that you can go book those tickets there. And I'll give you, we'll talk about more updates on that in each of our calls as we get closer to the event, if anything's changed. In terms of IPS 200 progress, now that was out for community review, and I see Heath, you're on the line. Can you give us the latest update on the IPS 200 publication?
Hi, everyone. The publication is in community review, and that was basically going to finish up this week. So I didn't get to attend the meeting this week, but my expectation is that that community review is complete and will be going up to its sponsoring committee. Stephen, you may be able to confirm this, but in the next week or so, with the intention that the publication will be finalized either before the working group meeting in Sunday or very soon after. So pretty much we will have an official 2.00 IPS standard for use in the next month.
Yeah, at today's patient care meeting, the work group voted to approve the publication. There are a few other tickets that needs to be discussed, and the plan is to have them discussed at the work group meeting and then bring it back to the conference call. But those tickets, I have confirmed that there are no shops, they are not showstoppers for the publication. So the work group has approved it. So it's the project lead will submit it, and then you'll be in the HL7 international pipelines. Most likely, I think is my estimate that it will be published after the work group meeting.
Thanks, Stephen.
Okay. So yeah, still September, but likely after the work group meeting. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I estimate it to be.
Which suits our timeframes. The next time we want to do a snapshot is for that December Connectathon, really. So that gives plenty of leeway for anything else that might need to be worked out by international. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that there are anything that sort of like needs to be worked out. The tickets that are being considered would be for future applications. So that's be after the publication of 2.0.0. So
Yep.
I don't think that there will be any material impact.
All right. Does anyone have any questions on IPS 200 that they'd like to ask this group? Noting, of course, we aren't the actual IPS project, but we are liaising with the IPS project, and certainly Stephen is a co-chair of the patient care work group in international that looks after this project. All right, hearing none, let's move on. Last bit is actions. We go through those. There's no open actions. We've got nothing open at the moment. So that's a none. Let's move on. Now, what I'm going to do now is ballot update. This is going to be our standard kind of repeating set of stats that we see until we have completed our ballot for comment activities. So going right back to the beginning, because I think we have quite a few new people on the call. There's a ballot sign-up period for HL7 AU members to form the consensus body that will essentially vote on proposed standard put forwards. That period closed in the very beginning of August so that ballot could start. The ballot period, which is open now until this Sunday. So for those voters who are there, and also for people who aren't voters but are reviewing this and would like to submit issues, you've got 3 days to go, including today, before that closes. And that's a hard deadline. We use the HL7 international tooling. It's automated. That will just be a closure. At the end of that period, we will have a set of feedback from the community, international and local, for us to consider. And we will start to work through that in all of our calls. And that's part of what we're going to do today, with the idea that we have actually worked through all of the feedback by the end of October. So that's the target, is that we take around 2 months to do that. So that September, October is basically focused on working through the community feedback Do we need new profiles? Are we actually removing things? Do we need clarity on guidance? Do we need examples? So that we can then go through a bit of publication of all those agreed things to do a ballot resolution snapshot at the end of November. The reason for that, of course, is coming back here, that there's going to be a Connectathon. That's our next testing opportunity, is beginning of December. So what we want to do is to have got incredibly wide feedback, national and international, on where we're going with Patient Summary. Work through in these fortnightly calls what changes we should make, publish a draft, and then take that to the December Connectathon to test and confirm whether or not this is actually working for all our testing participants, get additional feedback. That's essentially our target kind of approach and our target timeframes. In terms of voters, and I see I still need to fix the numbers. I didn't update them. I noticed that yesterday. We have 58 voters registered. One of these numbers is wrong. At the time I was writing this, I thought we had 9 individual members voting, and out of 14 different organizations, that's what the 14 is, that there were 50 voters that represent those different organizations. For example, I'm one. I'm a voter. I represent CSIRO. But one of those numbers is wrong, and I do have to fix that. Apologies. Hopefully for our next meeting, I will have addressed that. In terms of ballot votes, at the moment, we've got some numbers where people have already cast their vote. So every registered voter starts with a no vote, which just means that the voter has not actually logged in and taken action to cast their vote. That needs to move to be affirmative, negative, or abstain if the voter is actually going to vote. There's always reasons that there are no votes. Sometimes leave periods are bad. Sometimes there's technical issues. There can be all sorts of reasons why a registered voter doesn't have or hasn't been able to get to casting their vote. But we do obviously want that number to be as low as possible. At the moment, or this is more yesterday, there were 18 affirmative, 0 negative, 11 abstain. So this is the link here, and this is live. So let's actually go a look at what the numbers are now. This is the ballot definition. Everyone has access to this, by the way. This is publicly available. Right now, we actually have 21 affirmative. So that's gone from 18 to 21. Still 0 negative, still 11 abstain. So those numbers are just working their way through until we close at the end of Sunday. So it should be in our next call that I can provide you with the complete voting picture, because by that point, the tooling will have completed allowing people to vote. So let's talk about issues. When I was taking a snapshot of all of this yesterday, we had 17 issues so far. That's why there's a plus. There had been 17 pieces of feedback that had been raised, 3 of which have been triaged, because they're the 3 we're going to talk about today. Reconciliation is 0. Ideally, we will have made decisions in this meeting today. Do we agree with a change? What change is that? Or do we actually say, no, we don't agree with what has been proposed and no change will be made? And that will then change that number to hopefully 3 at the end of this meeting. And then what gets tracked in applied is how many of those changes have then been made into the draft specification, which will be available all the time. So those changes will be applied into the master of the CI build of the spec, with the target that we have completed application, at least in a normative sense, by the time we do the December Connectathon, so we can have some really good testing. That's a link to get to the filter of all the JIRA issues at the moment. HL7 AU will provide us with a specific ballot filter so that we can see all the voting issues. We don't have it yet. And I'm not going to go to this now. I think we've got lots more on our agenda to go through. Any questions on this set of information before I move off of, I guess, ballot stats? All right. So I'm going to hand over to Tim at this point for the Connectathon report back. Tim, did you want me to keep sharing my screen, or would you like to share your screen?
You can share your screen. I can order you to the next slide if you like. Thank you. Thank you, Danielle, and thank you all for attending the Connectathon. As Danielle mentioned earlier today, it was a rather successful event. I found myself very appreciative of all the people that were inside the Connectathon. I was a track lead for Patient Summary specifically, and there was a number of people in that that were just the energy and just the conversation was just so interesting around, connecting up, and we had some really good demos which I'll go into. So if we go to the next slide. For those who weren't there, sorry, I'll just mention it was held in Brisbane. It was at the Telstra building on level 4. It was in the same location as we were a year ago, and it was a sellout crowd. So that was a very, very great Connectathon, good conversations and good connections that were happening. What we were trying to achieve in the track specifically was Heath had pitched a couple of weeks prior to leading up to the event 3 scenarios that we really wanted to test around a producer server generating a patient summary, the second one being a producer application generating a patient summary, and a consumer that accesses a patient summary from the other side. So those 3 really core scenarios that we're achieving. The participants that joined, we had some examples here that we threw together just through the day. Best practice, we're able to generate a PS and share externally, and also being able to consume agency and Australian Digital Health Agency patient summary through the use of smart links, and they tested within Inferno as well. Halo were there, great to see. They were generating the patient summary and doing the test sets in Inferno. Create, they were also a cool MR vendor that did a patient viewer, as well as had very good story around the shared health link generator. So they were able to integrate with the agency, and they presented a demonstration of that workflow that centered around a patient story. We gave a demonstration of annotations and how they were flowing into the system, and persisted within that system. So it was a really good demonstration to see. Next page, Danielle. Orion Health were present as well. They were able to generate a patient summary. They were able to connect to Epic Best Practice and the agency, and also demonstrated a generate and aggregate patient summary that showed the ability how they consumed resources from the external FHIR server, and were able to represent on their portal, which is a really nice demonstration at the end of the Connectathon as well. We also had Medi Records, Neil there, sort of showing us their view around the IPS and the embedded referral letters. They were able to test their with the FHIR facade of best practice, and were able to demonstrate some dollar summaries. We attempted to connect them as part of the agency, but the agency hadn't implemented a dollar summary operation yet, but that's something that we're looking into in the future. MedTech, Alex was there as well, the implementation of the FHIR server interface, and had tested with Epic and supplied their own test data, which was good to see. Next slide. Epic were able to, as a foundational system, we're able to generate and share externally. Interfuse, we're building some custom patient summary scenarios as well, and I got the opportunity to talk to them about their test bed and what they were doing, and how that was coming together with a platform, an AI platform that was generating things and sparking things up, which had very interesting examples, use cases from what the agency would be looking at from standing up of a test environment. So we're going to reach out to them at some point to see what that looks like. Marta had the ability to load that core in that patient summary, AU patient summary profiles, and consumes the patient summary data. So that was really good to see. Next slide. The agency, we were there. We were able to provide a FHIR server this time, and Tarek was leading some of those discussions around the connectivity with the software vendors there. So we're able to consume. We also had that example around using the shared HealthLink scenario, which we had some use cases to support, and we were able to do a nice little integration demonstration there at the end of the day. POS were there, really great to see. They were consuming patient summaries, and we're working quite closely with Epic and Halo. Better software as well. Amazing to see just where they're going. They had they tested their EMR on the different endpoints, Halo and BP, as well as others. Next one there. Next slide. Okay, and then we had the breakout session. The day consisted of connecting with people and software, and then we had specific breakout sessions to talk about specific hot topics, and those hot pockets were around the generation access options for the patient summary. We discussed high level the IPS in an Australian context and what that looked like. There was a very robust conversation, which I think Graham Grieve was talking about, international versus Australian, which was good to see. The use of the Smart Health Link, I want to say application, but it's not. It's a little framework tool there to help the integrations of that sharing around the access tokens and everything. It's really good to see that coming together. We discussed some core issues and topics around when we presented as the agency the patient story, and we're able to add annotations as part of an extension that had generated some good discussions around how that could be done in other places around globally. And we also then got onto the topic of problem list item categories, condition categories that had a little bit more of a further topics of discussions to discuss about how we address that moving forward. Another breakout session was around the FHIR IG authoring, and where they discussed the cross versions and new infrastructures for R4, R6 interoperability. So that was really good. I got FOMO. I didn't get to see that one, but I heard it was a great discussion that I'd like to get into next time. And then there's a little Menti view that we sort of did as well. This was thanks, Danielle. Next slide. This was just a graphical representation of who was involved. It's not a comprehensive one. I might have missed people, and if I have, so I really, really apologize. I think I didn't get Marta on this list, so I'll make sure that that's an update to it. But it's just showing that the systems were connecting together to servers, consumers as people pulling a patient summary out of the servers and presenting them. So it's just a way of graphing the data there. And then the report out, we had some discovery questions and issues that we saw across the day, some around the terminology differences and validation between LOINC and SNOMED CT, and all the issues that were raised as part of that breakout session. So the core ones around the annotations and the problem list conditions. Generally, feedback that I got personally, I think everyone was just very keen to connect, to get a pitch on where it's going and how it would be used contextually. They're very interested in those workflow insights, but it was a great opportunity to connect to people and keeping the message going. So I think that was a very much a key theme of the 2 days.
Thanks, Tim. Does anyone have any questions about the Connectathon, or any kind of comments that they want to provide about their experiences at the Connectathon this week? All right. Well, let me put this in front of you. We're trying to build out a wider graphical kind of thing in Spark because as Tim was showing and what I saw when I was there across all the different tracks, the connection this time for me was markedly amazing. And this isn't everything. We're still trying to build out all the arrows from the participants on the day. But across, at least in the Spark tracks, and we're I'm only really tracking the Sparked projects, and there were other tracks there. So the smart stuff is going great guns as well. This is kind of some of what we were starting to see about the connection across the ecosystem of participants there, which I think was just such a jump. And I'd started to see that jump at the Spark testing event in June of really starting to see a whole bunch of different app kind of vendors come into play. And I think we really saw that this time, and that was really, really exciting. I might, when we've finished building out the arrows, I might show this again at our next call. But yeah, it was just great work by the community in starting to, or actually, it's not really starting anymore. It's actually coming through and demonstrating for particular use cases how they're actually connecting to each other and building through for their customer outcomes. It's pretty amazing. Which takes me to this next bit. For Patient Summary in particular, we had 3 totally new vendors. Not all of them are on this slide because we don't actually have the test results yet from them. So we got Epic for the first time. Epic has been at the majority of connectathons and testing events, but we didn't have a FHIR interface there. The connectathon this week in Brisbane was where we first got a FHIR interface that a number of participants could connect to, and we actually have test results from that. So Epic is there. Other totally new people were MARTA and MedTech. And from a patient summary perspective, what's also new is Create IT. They have previously been in AU Core, but they hadn't expanded into a patient summary use case, and they really brought that from an app perspective and a consumer in this particular connectathon. So we're still putting together the details of the test results, which will start to feed in for us from a starting to evaluate the FHIR maturity model levels. I think there now are a number of resources that we can evaluate to be at AFMM2, for example, which is where you have the majority of your mandatory or must support elements have at least 3 independent systems testing evidence. And I think out of the last Connectathon, we're quite clearly there for a whole bunch of different resources. But yeah, this was, I think, a really, really good event, and I'll provide the completed stats, I'm hoping, at the next call, which will show like who's tested, what resources, and what particular interactions. Any, I guess, other questions around this before we move on to the next part of the topic for this meeting? All right, not seeing anything. So what we're about to do now is our first ballot reconciliation. We've got 3 items here that are being brought to this call to vote on. I'll go through those. All 3 are normative. All 3 are, raised by me. So I will raise these, but I won't be able to motion because I'm chairing this meeting. So we'll go through each of these individually. And I might just start with that first one. Click. It's, thinking about it. All right, I'm going to go bring up our actual patient summary bundle file for and let's also bring up IPS.
I'll warn you, Danielle, there has been some changes to the build this morning.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to check, because one of the, yeah, thank you, Heath. Indeed. So what you're actually, what I'll first do is we'll preface this, then we'll go look at IPS, which it actually seems like this has been answered by the IPS project for 80% of what I'd raised, and therefore we are obligated to bring it in because we have to be conformant to IPS. And I'll take that approach. At the time at which we were doing ballot, we were inheriting the obligations of the IPS. And those obligations for all the mandatory items were shall able to populate. And shall able to populate means that systems need to have the capability to do that, and must, in a conformance testing scenario, demonstrate that under some circumstances, they are capable of filling out an identifier or type or timestamp, or filling out an actual composition. Again, they're all shall able to populate. With the discussions we've had in Australia, we were pretty clear that there is both an expectation that systems are capable of completing what is viewed as the mandatory items, but there's this additional expectation that if a system has that they actually provide it, assuming that they are allowed to share. There's always that allowed to share aspect in terms of the security scenario. And so we were looking at this and concerned that the obligation that was present was just a capable one, but it didn't actually drive system behavior. When they generated patient summaries, they were actually filling out the things that they were capable of if they have the information. So that was the genesis of this ballot issue I raised, which also Heath had been representing our group and taking that argument back up to the IPS project call at the same time. But that hadn't actually been addressed at the time that ballot was opened. So essentially, the ballot item for Australia was to say that for all the elements in our bundle profile that we say are mandatory, and that there is this shall able to populate, we need to be adding an obligation that they actually then do populate it when they have it, which you can either do by converting everything to shall populate, which is my preference, or you can do it via a second obligation. So that was essentially the proposal for that change. Subsequent to that being raised, it looks like IPS, and maybe you want to provide a summary here, Heath, on what those changes are.
Sorry, I was muted. Author, title, and event have been upgraded to...
No, wrong resource. This is bundle.
This is bundle. I'm sorry. You're right. Identifier, timestamp, and entry composition have been upgraded to populate, shall populate.
Yep. So essentially everywhere IPS had shall able to populate, they have now clarified that to be shall populate. It's worth noting that in AU Patient Summary, we have a convention that all mandatory items must support an obligation, because we've taken a standpoint. Sorry, Keith?
I was going to say the same, it's effectively the same principle at IPS level.
Except I note right here that they don't.
Yeah.
And then also there they don't. So
Well, there's a different reason for that. They've basically deferred the obligations on patient, but yeah, type is, it's kind of infrastructural, but you're good point.
agreed. It's one of the things that we looked at when we did the walkthrough of AU Patient Summary Bundle, that we noted the inconsistencies, basically, and moved to clarify in the Australian profile that where anything is mandatory, which means that a producer has to do something, we would provide clarification on what that producer has to do. And again, since it's mandatory, the consumer will receive it. And again, we would clarify in our Australian Patient Summary what those obligations are, which is why we took the position that all mandatory elements must support an obligation, and that there would be a clarification on what those are. So it is a little bit different to IPS.
Just, I guess for clarity, because these changes are being made as part of the community review and not part of, I guess, a ballot reconciliation process. So we couldn't make substantive changes. We could only make technical corrections. And I was able to justify that this was a technical correction because of consistency with the rest of the specification. Whereas something like type was not already must support and was never balloted as must support, and hence that was seen as more of a substantive change.
Yep. So the proposal in front of this call is that for all the must support elements in AUPS bundle, which is our profile in Australian Patient Summary, they're all mandatory, that we have the obligations of that have the following obligations, that we change able to populate to be populate. Noting that about 50% of those we're now inheriting, since IPS has applied shall populate instead of able to populate in their profile. So the difference between IPS and us is that on those extra elements that are mandatory, that they have not clarified the obligations, we do here. So we would change that to shall populate and retain the shall handle. I'm going to open that up for questions.
So just to clarify, I guess, and put it into context, type, for example, is something that is not in IPS, but we're going to go and add it as must support with those obligations.
It already is must support, because we have a standing agreement that all mandatory elements are must support, so that we provide that clarification. Yep. We automatically have to inherit, and I'll get to you in a second. Sorry, Michael Wilson, I can see your hand up. We will automatically inherit the change to change this from able to populate, and this from able to populate. But because Australia is taking the extra clarification step to go, well, this mandatory element, we're going to describe the obligations. We need to also therefore confirm that we would keep this element in line with the ones surrounding it.
What about patient? The entry patient?
Same deal.
Okay.
Yep. Same choice. Because it's mandatory, we have provided clarification on what that mandatoriness is for both producers and consumers. All right, Michael Wilson.
Yeah, I think you just clarified my question, but I think what you're saying here is that all mandatory elements, so cardinalities 1 or more, will be must support and will have that obligation of shall populate and shall handle.
Yes.
Yep. And regardless of what IPS has in our spec, we will have that.
Yes, noting that even if we vote no today, some of these will automatically change because IPS has already strengthened the ones that they bother to cover.
Yeah, but just to cover us, that's the decision we're making here.
That's right,
They'll
yes.
all be mandatory. They'll all be shall populate. All mandatory elements will be must support and shall populate.
That's right, yes.
Excellent. Thanks.
Richard?
You talk about us. I'm very happy with these changes. You talk. Sorry. The other thing is that I was at a working group, HL7 International Working Group meeting this morning, where people talking about this were very grateful for the Australian involvement and mentioned Heath's name as being a useful contributor. Getting on from that, looking at this thing here, you talk about for instance, on identifier, shall populate as being inherited. I'm wondering, how is that inherited given that we've got here an actor which is an AU PS producer rather than the IPS producer?
Okay. Thank you for that question. That is a wonderful segue into a whole number of our inheritance relationships. Our AUPS producer is derived from IPS. So we inherit the obligations. Because we made that agreement, obviously we can change this, but it means an Australian patient summary no longer conforms to an international patient summary, nor could it be then expected to be used by IPS aware systems overseas. The intention set out from this project that I think everybody has confirmed in every meeting that that's what they want, means that our AU patient summary actors are derived from the international ones. In fact, I've got a very snappy page. So we have something called the AUPS, and we talk here about localization. And this confirms that a valid AU patient summary document is a valid IPS document, and a conformant AUPS actor is a conformant IPS actor. And that's the intention we've agreed to so far in this project. And that's kind of reflecting the fact that we therefore, when IPS strengthens its obligations for its actors, unless we change this principle, we therefore inherit. Whether we do that in an automated machine sense, because we machine derive the profile, or if we're manually authoring some of those things, that just triggers us to change and update those manually authored requirements. Does that answer that for you, Richard?
Yes, it does. I wonder whether that in how visible through the tooling is that? Is that one of those things where, yes, we've got inheritance, but the tooling doesn't make it visible when we're looking at the hierarchies?
I would appreciate you having a look at the whole spec and providing an analysis of that. Because there are two ways we've tried to do this. One of which is also the international tooling has really tried to address that, but there are gaps. We've got these phrases about built on these two. We've got whole sections that talk about this continuously. But in terms of automated, and I mean, I've got to be frank, I don't love how, hang on, let me actually go to it. Where we were on the actors, I know we say here, right up front, an AU patient summary consumer shall comply with the requirements of this. And then we have the derived from blah, and which is the IPS one. I think where we need to go is if you have suggestions on how do we make that more front and center, I think that's where we need to go now. It's on the pages in multiple locations, but if it's not really obvious to people, we've got to make it better. And I think myself and the tooling people have just kind of run out of ideas at this point.
Is it the actors that you're talking about, Richard, or is it actually in the profile itself?
I guess I was looking in the profile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, we'll go back
That's
to the
what I thought. That's
profile.
what I thought your question was related to.
Yeah, when
Which
you
is
look at the
kind of
profile,
similar though, because
I
up
have
the
no
top-
idea how to make this better, but I just, when we looked at the profile,
which says, I mean,
yeah.
we've got some words here about conforms to bundle IPS. And then we have here about profile complies with bundle IPS.
Here with the, okay, if you look at the, yeah, okay, if we look at the identifier, so that we're in the differential table, the identifier has here the obligations, and it's talking about the AUPS obligations. Is there a more complete display of obligations if you look in the snapshot table or the key elements table that mentions those?
Currently, no. And in many different iterations of ID Publisher, there were. This is being worked through an international tooling of how many should you see?
Yeah, because you don't want so many you can't find the stuff that's important, but you do want to be able to see how these tie together.
That being said, I would never advocate to show IPS here because we have been markedly clear that AUPS producer is a derived actor from IPS. And we've got documentation everywhere saying that we are localizing this, but it's about localization. We're not actually advocating for IPS actor use. So I still wouldn't suggest that we actually see it in the snapshot.
Yeah, okay, right, good. I'm happy, thank you.
And Heath?
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. It gets ugly because I've been working with Liam on a Smart Health Checks profile, and he's using fish, and a lot of those obligations come through when we start to do things like this. I think the difference here is that we're using complies with, so they don't come through, but when they're derived from, and I'm talking in the context of AU Core, where he's deriving from AU Core, all those obligations from AU Core come through, but they're actually completely irrelevant to the Smart Health Checks because they have different actors. So it gets really verbose and horrible if we do that. So I completely agree. We don't want these to come through. And I think the way that Danielle's actually done this is it's basically she's done all the work for us. In the publish, or her and Dushi have done all the work for us by merging the two. The tools in the background are doing the validation of all of that. So they get told if there's a variance, but from us as readers, we just have to take this as on face value, which I think is a good thing.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we diverged onto what was, I think, actually quite a useful side topic around actors and obligations. Coming back to the proposal that we're looking to vote on, and that is that in a UPS bundle, all the mandatory elements which have must support should change shall able to populate to become shall populate. Because that brings in both the you're capable of doing so, and then it brings in the requirement that if you have it, you will actually go ahead and then populate it if you're allowed to share. And that is the proposal put in front of this group. Are there any other questions about this or anything else that people would like to kind of get in more detail before we move to a vote? Hearing none, would anyone like to motion? Hang on, let me bring it up. Would anyone like to motion to strengthen in a UPS bundle, able to populate to populate?
I'm happy to motion that, Michael.
I'm happy to second.
Okay, thank you, Michael, for motioning. Thank you, Heath, for seconding. Any other questions and comments while I move to launch the poll? All right, I'm putting that in front of the group. You should see now the electronic poll for affirmative, negative, and abstain. Please vote on those. If you can't vote, please pop it in the chat of +1 for affirmative, negative, or abstain. And if you've dialed in, you can say your name and affirmative, negative, or abstain. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. Taking into account the vote in the chat, we now have 17 affirmative, 0 negative, and 2 abstain. The motion carries. We will make that change to strengthen the able to populate to be populate. Thank you, everybody. Let's move to the next one. Aha, so we're going to, we've got 2 here. I actually might move to this bottom one because I think this one is easier. And it might already be addressed by IPS, actually. Has this one been addressed, Heath? Do you know off the top of your head? We can go have a look.
Yes.
Ah, well, this might be quick. So I originally raised, this is very similar. And if we go have a look at AU Patient Summary, which at the time inheriting the IPS rules, there were many mandatory elements with shall populate, but author had only populate if known, which based on community feedback was a concern, that it was actually really important for systems who are generating patient summary documents, whether that's direct authoring or pre-pop with curation or even machine generating, that we have information about the author to provide some provenance data. So it was a concern for us, and I've raised that ballot issue to say that we actually should have a system capability requirement if you're going to be able to populate patient summaries. So that was where that ballot issue was raised. But based on what Heath has said, that gap has already been closed up by IPS. So we'll just go to that now here. Confirm that we now have shall populate in, and I'm just in the IPS profile now. Oops, went too far. Here we go. Okay, so that's shall populate. Heath?
Just for clarity, the title has also been upgraded to shall populate on the next line.
Oh, next line. Sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
And also the code within the care provision event. That's also populate. It's made as part of the same change.
Okay. So what I think I'm actually going to do is withdraw this issue. I've raised it, but I think because this is inherited by IPS, I don't think we have to, because this is inherited or should be inherited by us because we are complying to IPS, we don't need to put this to a vote. Unless there are any objections, what I'll just do is withdraw this issue, and we will make that change as part of an update to the very latest IPS changes.
And just to be clear, it doesn't have to be voted because it's effectively now just a TC, a technical correction.
I don't even think we need to do it as a TC, a technical correction. I think that's, in terms of process, I think there's an understood principle that we will comply with IPS, which is still currently in development for the next, well, until they publish. So hopefully within a fortnight that will get completely stable. But until that point, we have a mandate agreed by this group to inherit those changes. So, the IG editors should advise those as and when they come in, And we can also then raise issues if there's any particular changes we don't agree with. But the flow in of IPS changes into AUPS is, I think, an already pre-approved pipeline of work. Does anyone have any objections to me just withdrawing this issue on the basis that we have a pre-approved agreement that the IPS constraints are flowed into AU Patient Summary? All right, I'm not hearing any. I saw a thumbs up. Appreciate it. Okay, so I will withdraw this issue. I'll make a note on why this is being withdrawn. And we can move on to this one. So this is composition again. I'll just go back to, no, that's IPS composition. Here we go. Am I on the diff view? Yes, right. Just quick overview for people while we get into this. The way IPS works is there are sections for this patient summary document, and they're categorized as required, which means they're all mandatory. So they have a cardinality. If you have this information or not, you still have to have that section present and do something about it. Then there's a recommended set of patient summary information. This is optional. Typically, it'll have a bunch of shoulds for producers to say you should do this, you should display it, you should, etc. And then there's a set of additional information that is defined that is optional. They're also optional in terms of cardinality, and they're more mays. So this is really shalls, shoulds, mays is kind of roughly how the obligation breakdown works. And I'll just go through what that looks like now in AU Patient Summary and why I have raised a issue for us to add in an obligation on a producer of a patient summary. So just moving down to the sections. Okay. So at sections, and I'll move past the all section slices, you should now see section problems. And in section problems, and there are 3 of these sections that are mandatory, what you can see is it's a shall populate for that section, which can make sense. For the entry inside that section, there's a must support type here, which is a must support on a structured entry for the problem section. And it has these obligations. These are inherited from IPS at the moment. And it is a shall able to populate, as in systems who say they are conformant to AU Patient Summary, or in fact, International Patient Summary, must demonstrate the capability to populate a structured condition piece of information. So you can't just be narrative text only and say that you are going to be conformant to the specification. That will not be conformant to either IPS or AU Patient Summary. The other obligation here, which I was just talking about, was populate if known. So there's a requirement that the system has to be capable of having structured condition information. And then there's a should here on populate if known. There's many things packed into that. Part of those things include the understanding that just because your system is capable doesn't mean you actually will have a structured entry for every single patient record. And so shall able to populate doesn't actually preclude your system for even having data entry that is just text rather than being structured, depending on how you're getting that data. It just means that if you actually were to get it for a particular patient and had all that data, you need to demonstrate you're capable of having something structured here. Before I move on to the populate if known, can I ask if there are any questions about that? Was that confusing? Did that make sense? Neil, you've gone off mute. Do you have a question?
Yeah, yeah, that was a bit confusing for me because like if you don't have the data at that for that particular patient, how do you demonstrate that you have the ability? How is that validated, and how do you demonstrate if you don't have data for that particular patient?
I would assume in a conformance testing scenario, you're going to need test personas that actually do have the structured data. I think if we think a bit more wide ranging, like if you have a HIE that's aggregating, some of their sources might only have just like narrative stuff. That's still okay. That's all they've got. But if they get structured data, they need to demonstrate they can have it and then send it back out again. So you'll need to have, in a conformance testing scenario, at least one of your test personas would need to have the structured data, and for you to demonstrate that, that would be how it works, I think, in my perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Heath?
I was going to attempt to help with that, but if everyone's happy, I'll be quiet.
I think we'll probably end up coming back to it time and time again. And it's not a bad thing for us to be focusing on what do these obligations really mean for me and how do I demonstrate it.
In that
So
case,
I think it's
I might
valuable.
just make one quick comment. Basically, it's a should in this particular case, because they're not saying that there may be contextual situations when you're using a patient summary where you don't want to provide this information. That is my understanding of why they did a should. I don't necessarily agree with this, but that's their rationale that they gave me. So you have to show, as Danielle said, through conformance that you're capable of, but that doesn't preclude you from not using it in certain circumstances or certain contexts.
And Richard, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I've taken it down again now, so don't worry about it.
Okay. So there really is, the way that they're tracking this is the distinction between you're capable of doing it, and then there's the populating it if known. It's probably even a bit weirder and trickier, as in, even if you have the structured data for a problem, this one is a should populate if known. And we're off the topic now on the particular change request. That's not a problem. I think this is worth digging into. The text part, text is mandatory. So for every section in the patient summary document, you need to provide a text summary of that information. Now, this is mandatory. So you will always be providing some kind of human readable, unstructured summary of what this is. You have to be capable of having the structure, and then it is up to you as an implementer to decide if you also provide that structure. It's a should. We'd like you to, but it's not a shall. You definitely have to do the unstructured stuff up here. Does that help, Neil?
Yes, thanks. So I guess from my point of view, it's those two together automatically imply two test scenarios, basically.
Yeah. Agree. Yeah, agree. Richard?
Yeah, I mean, some of what's going on here is the difference between requirements of the data and requirements of the system. So the obligations are about requirements on the system. The system shall be able to behave in a certain way, or the system shall behave in a certain way. But while the other thing is around if your data has to be like this, or don't bother sharing it. And so those two interact, but they're slightly different.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good way of putting it. All right, I'm going to move on unless there are any other questions. And I do welcome at this point, because I think these kind of questions around what does all of this actually mean, because they are driving the conformance requirements that will then end up in legislation, is important for this group to understand and make a series of informed decisions around where we want to place rules on system behavior and where we want to be silent on them, and therefore allow for, I guess, implementer discretion. I'm just going to roll down. So, sorry, this was an example. Section problems. There are 3 required sections. There's problems, allergies, meds. They have the same obligations. The section is shall populate. It's also mandatory. You have to have this. You also have to be capable of providing it. Same with the text here. You actually have to be capable of providing meaningful text summary of this information for your patient. For the entry, and whether it's problem, and I'll show it to you in allergies, you have to be capable of having structured data for the section. It is then up to you on if you populate that structured data. Is how these 2 obligations work together. And you'll see the same thing in allergies. Again, shall populate here. The text is shall populate. The entry is you have to be capable of it. And it is up to you if you provide the structure. So we'll move past meds because, again, same thing. We move to a different pattern when we get to the recommended sections. And the recommended sections follow the same pattern. And so that's immunizations, medical devices. Actually, let me just, here it is. Immunizations, diagnostic results, history of procedures, so it's just procedures, and medical devices. This is usually your implemented medical devices is the expectation. These are all viewed as recommended pieces of data. And you'll see these obligations shift. This now says should populate if known. There isn't any requirement on capability. There's not even we expect systems who can do patient summaries to be able to do immunizations. If we were going to say that in AU patient summary, we would have to have a should able to populate. But at the moment, and we're inheriting this totally from IPS, there are no expectations for producing systems that they even have the capability of doing this in the first place. Bit of a call out from me on if that's actually what people are expecting from systems in Australia, that we don't actually have any expectations around the capability to do immunisation information. If that's different, I would really appreciate someone raising a JIRA issue to suggest that we consider adding at least a should able to populate. But if that works, then we'll just leave it as is.
This, in fact, is if you expect them to have the immunizations, but you're allowed to just have it in the general bulk of text without being able to identify the immunization information as a separate piece of what they're sending, then that works fine. So I have my immunization information in my patient summary. I can't actually identify it as a separate part of the thing I've got. So that means that I don't actually have to find it and put it into my immunization section. I could just put it in the composition text. But if I'm able to identify which part of this piece of information I'm hammering into my patient summary is about immunizations, then I should pull that out of the general piece and I should put it into the immunization section. So the fact that you haven't put your immunization information into the immunizations section doesn't mean you haven't got immunization information. It just means you've got no way of automatically dragging it out and putting it into a separate immunization section. You could put it into the general text part of the composition.
I think both are true. There's no requirement for a system to have the immunization information in the first place. And also they might have it, but be unable to distinguish it. And so this is going to be the obligation for all of those sections: immunizations, diagnostic results, procedures, medical devices. The section is just if you know you have it, you should populate it. We make no requirements on you to be capable of doing it in the first place. Maybe you have it, maybe you don't. And if you do have it, we also don't require you to provide it. That's totally up to you. So that's what leaving it as should populate if known. Oops, I clicked on a thing. Means. And so that's true for all the recommended sections. As we come down to the entries, what we do see is we do see this should populate if known. But what is absent is any statement of requirement on the capability to do so. Wherever there is an absent statement, that needs to be read as may. So this is may able to populate, and then should populate if known. And this is true across immunizations, results, medical devices, and there's 4 sections. What was the other one? Procedures. But there's no recommendation that systems should be capable of having structured data for this. Hence my proposal. We're running out of time now, so we'll see how we go. We might just do this quickly and then put it over to the next meeting if we need to. My proposal is that we should add a should able to populate for all the section entries. Based on all the meetings that we have been having around things like immunizations in Australia and so forth, there has been an expectation that people are building the capability to be able to be communicating this information in structured format, not just text. So in representation of that, I've created a JIRA issue proposal that says we add an additional obligation that is a should able to populate, which is essentially a recommendation that systems should add the capability to provide structured immunization data, structured diagnostic result data, and so forth. It's no hard requirement. It's a recommendation on a roadmap for Australia providing digital health information. That's essentially what that ballot issue is. Questions on that? I'm not hearing any. So would anyone like to motion hang on, not that one. We've already got rid of that. That we add the obligation should able to populate for the section entries in recommended sections. Heath, your hand is up.
Rather than having an extra obligation, why don't we go to should populate? Because effectively that is the equivalent.
We could indeed do so. We could go to should populate. I can say why I didn't suggest it in the first place, which is because the mandatory sections have in their entries 2 obligations. And I thought it looked probably easier for people to consume to keep the 2 obligations.
But they're at 2 different strengths, which is the rationale of them being 2 different obligations.
Maybe. Yeah, they are equivalent, I will agree. Semantically equivalent. I don't mind if that's what we end up doing. So we have I guess that's a friendly amendment, Heath.
Yeah, it is a friendly amendment, but only if the group is comfortable with that.
Okay, before we ask that question, can I ask if anyone is willing to second the motion, and then we'll ask about the friendly amendment?
I'm willing to second the motion, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. Okay,
So-
we'll open this back up for questions.
So
We
who
have our
moved it?
motioner here, seconder Richard.
Am I? Okay.
You did motion. And with the friendly amendment that this should change the should populate if known to become should populate for the recommended section entries.
A comment in terms of the idea of the friendly amendment simplifying it, but making it perhaps a little more obscure, is there could be an easily findable piece of guidance that about the equivalence of should populate and the combination of should able to populate and should populate if known. Basically to try and simplify the fact that some of them have got 2 entries and then some have got 1 entry, that if there's a line of explanation about that somewhere in the IG that was easily findable, that would get rid of that obscurity that Danielle was trying to avoid by having 2 lines instead of 1.
Sounds like a ballot response, Richard. Because it goes for shall as well.
Well, this one here, I mean, the one we're looking at where we've got a shall and a should, it needs to be 2 because we've got the only way to say this is with the two obligations. But if you go down to the other one, where Danielle's got the pair of shoulds.
I'm just finding one. There we go.
Okay, so changing this to that's only the single one. I thought you were wanting to have it as a pair of
That is what
shoulds.
I had suggested. Because they are silent on may able to populate.
Yeah.
I suggested adding a second one simply because I probably thought, for people unfamiliar for obligations, seeing 2 up above and 2 down below would be easier for people to consume. It has no normative difference. I thought that it was probably easier for where we are in terms of FHIR adoption.
So there is a section around the obligations that in the IG. Not to say that descriptions make sense, but there is some discussion around populate, able to populate, and populate if known.
And there is description linked off. This is a hyperlink off to the code system that defines exactly what this means. So where are we? Are we going should populate, should able to populate? Well, I'm time boxing this to 1 minute so we can vote.
I mean, as much as I've moved it, I would be very keen to make sure that everyone else is comfortable with this.
Can I have a show of hands? Who prefers a should populate? And use your Zoom hands to do that. Zoom reactions. I'm seeing a thumbs up. Couple of hands. All right, that's looking probably around 8 people. No, 9. Yep. All right. Can I get you to put your hands down? So who would prefer instead of that a should able to populate being added as a second obligation? Heath, your hand is up. All right, I'm only seeing 2. All right, it looks like the should populates are quite a majority here. So I think that is the motion that you put forward, Heath, on changing. So this would be persuasive with modification to change the obligation from should able to populate to should populate. And you're still happy to second, Richard?
Yes, I am.
All right, unless there are any other comments or questions, I'm going to move to launch the electronic poll. I'm going to relaunch that poll now. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you would like to put your vote in the chat as a +1 affirmative, negative, or abstain, you can. And if you've dialed in, you can say your name and affirmative, negative, or abstain. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'll double check. Tim, do you have a vote?
Yes, mine's in the chat. +1 affirmative.
Okay. So with that, we have 17 affirmative, 0 negative, 3 abstain. We will be passing that motion, noting the friendly amendment to make this persuasive with modification, that the obligation will change to be should populate. And we're almost at time, so I'm going to have to roll right through the last couple of bits. Next meeting, we're going to do more ballot reconciliation, folks. If we get time, we'll do a composition walkthrough. Depends on how interesting the chat is. There will be a notification out via email early next week on which JIRA issues we're going to be voting on. So look forward to that. I want to put a call out to people. We've got a face-to-face in Canberra coming up. We try to do those 3 to 4 times a year. The official comms and everything aren't out yet. That should be out in the next couple of weeks. But it's going to be a TDG day on the 13th in Canberra. This is primarily a patient summary agenda. So we're going to keep talking about a few things. AU patient summary hot topics, like what's coming out of this group, what do we need to keep working through? So far, that's been really exchange options and also maybe some kind of cool stuff around encryption. We're also going to need to continue the conversation around considerations when consuming IPS documents in the Australian context. Part of the reason we have to do that is that there will be coming an international IG Council policy that requires jurisdictional patient summaries to have a clear set of documentation around that. So we do need to work on putting that together for R1. The last point that is becoming a high possibility, actually, is that we might do an R3 scoping EOI, as in we'll be putting out a call to people who to come and present on what they think could and should be added to AU Core in the next release in this November workshop. That was put to the AU Core TDG yesterday. Which did have, I think, about 8 people who were interested. I have subsequently been contacted by a number of people who were kind of keen to do that. So I think we're seeing that that's going to be likely to start talking about that conversation. I'm just raising it with this group. If there are things that you can start percolating in the background, that you can come and present what should be those scope additions. All right. That's it from me. Are there any other comments or questions before we close the meeting? All right, thanks everyone. We got through our list and I'll send you some comms after this. Appreciate your work.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks all. See you later.